Alright, well, I'm sure you've all seen at this point the field staffer for the Bernie Sanders campaign railing on about how gulags weren't that bad and that anyone who goes against the revolution are going to die for it, and generally a montage of other insane Marxist babble. Now, first off, let me plant a flag. I know enough Bernie Sanders supporters to realize that no, not all of them are like this. In fact, the vast majority of Bernie Sanders supporters are good, noble people who really want the best for everybody. They're just highly misguided on how economic activity plays out when government distorts the market, and they don't seem to realize that that is the source of nearly all of our problems. But the thing for Sanders supporters to realize is that this is not shocking. Everything Bernie Sanders says is dripping with labor theory of value Marxist nonsense. This is where it comes from, and this is also where it very often leads because guess what? Bernie Sanders had to admit that taxes would go up for everyone if he were to implement Medicare for all, let alone everything else he wanted to do. So I don't know where the line is for the middle class, but there will be a point in which people say enough is enough. I'm no longer paying these taxes. Here's $10. Good luck. So what happens when that happens? Well, they are now tax cheats. I wouldn't put it past the IRS to send agents to people's homes to see why they're not giving the IRS their cut of the loot. If you get enough people doing that, which by the way would be a completely rational course of action to take if the taxes you are paying are putting you underwater, as taxes are already doing to people, but if enough people do this, then you have a nightmare scenario very reminiscent of people being thrown into cages because they're trying to make ends meet. But by doing so, they become the enemies of the state, and they become eligible to be thrown into a cage. Sounds a lot like every socialist, Marxist, communist state that has ever existed. And frankly, I don't trust Bernie Sanders when he says he's not talking about places like Venezuela, Cuba, or the Soviet Union. The reason why I don't trust him is because those are the exact places that he could not heap enough praise upon throughout his life. He said Venezuela bread lines are a good thing. He said the American dream is more likely to be found in Venezuela. He said, yes, the Soviet Union has problems, but the work they're doing is great. He said we've been lied to about Cuba. The Cuban people love their leadership, and they've provided them free health care and education, so I don't trust him at all. And the only reason he has backtracked on these comments is because we then found out, as if we didn't know already, with no room for misinterpretation, what an unmitigated authoritarian nightmare all of those places turned out to be. So let's take a look at what this Bernie Sanders field organizer said. Well, first off, he said that gulags weren't as bad as what the CIA said they were. Alright, I'm fine with not trusting the CIA, but thankfully you don't have to listen to the CIA when it comes to this. In fact, I don't think I've ever read anything about the gulags from the CIA. I'm sure they said plenty, but I've never read it, because it's all first-hand testimony and experience from people who are actually in gulags. There are untold numbers, thousands upon thousands of testimonies from people on what they endured and what they witnessed. And it was utterly horrifying. People brought out of their quarters and shot in the head for looking at a guard wrong. They got a living wage. Well, that's good because they were routinely forced to do hard physical labor for over 12 hours a day with a thin coat and sub-freezing temperatures, and they were allocated a piece of bread for a meal. Gulags were an utter, absolute, hopeless situation. And notice how he tries to say gulags aren't bad, but then he has this gleeful little moment where it's obvious that he can't wait to send billionaires and anyone who opposes them politically to camps all day breaking rocks. I'm sure he doesn't want to simply put them into a nice cozy prison with conjugal visits and where they get paid a nice living wage. You have to be completely unable to read people to think someone like this isn't psychopathic and wouldn't want to torture or kill these people, considering, well, that's exactly what he said he wants to do. And not just billionaires. He said if you want to go against or fight against the revolution, you're going to die for it. He said this right after he mentioned what Cuba did to people, which was take them to the beach and execute them. Which is true, they did do that. And just as a reminder, remember what I said before, Bernie Sanders praised these countries? That isn't an insignificant point. Also, the other odd thing to point out is that these people generally have a huge problem with private prisons, which private prisons in the US are just de facto arms of the government, since they lobby government to keep bad laws on the books and keep the war on drugs going so they can profit off of people going to jail. But it's odd. Private prisons are bad, yet gulags are spoken about in a very glowing and positive way. How obvious does it need to be that reality is lost on this guy and others like him? So what else did this guy say? Well, he also said that we need to re-educate everybody, educate them how to not be a Nazi, and this is what's really behind Bernie Sanders' free education proposal. Okay, are there really Nazis around? Is that a big problem? I think I've mentioned this before, but I've lived in a lot of different places in the US, and I think throughout my time, I might have met one real actual white supremacist in my life. He was handing out his dumb little pamphlet on his militia or whatever on a street corner, and that's it. So this guy is partaking in a classic exercise of conflation. Someone doesn't agree with me politically, they must be a Nazi. Someone is a Democrat, they must praise Stalin and think Mao just did what he needed to do. It's just utter insanity. But anyway, it's always a good thing to be given a reminder of the seedy underbelly of socialist thought. There is a bloodthirsty narrative rattling around in the heads of socialists, and it's baked right into the DNA of that entire philosophy, if that's what you can even call it. So ask yourself, do you really think it will be people like this, or anyone even resembling this person, who will bring about some utopia? I mean, if you think so, I've got a bridge to sell you. But that's all for now. Like, subscribe, and share, and you take it easy.